Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to another Fabric Power BI Portugal community meetup. My name is Pedro Reis. I'll be one of your hosts. I'm here with also Susana. Hi Susana.
Hello everyone.
Hello João, also one of our community organizers. Hi João. Okay, and today we have a special guest. We have Reid Havens. Hey Reid, good morning to you, right?
Buenos dias. Good evening to you and good morning for me.
Yeah, exactly. So Reid is someone that we wanted to have in the community for some time. He even considered at one point coming to Portugal to enjoy the famous São João in Porto, but that didn't happen at the time. So we're really glad to have you here on this time, Reid, on the meetup. And guys, because Reid is one of the community experts, he's a Microsoft data platform MVP for I think about 6 years, Reid, right?
I'll be getting my 6th chip this year. Yes.
Great. Okay. So, and he's been around the community a lot of time delivering content, publishing videos on YouTube, his own content, getting people sharing things on his channel. So, a great community contributor, and someone who has a great expertise on many things. But particularly, something I enjoy is the part of making reports that people really want to enjoy, to use, that people want to come back to use it and can take value from them, Reid. And that's a little bit what you've come to share with us today, right?
Exactly. Yep. Just a little bit of that artistic touch that goes into some of the design.
Great. So Reid, I think we're ready to start whenever you want. So me and Susana will also be here, guys, to assist. If you have any question, we prefer much more that if you just want to raise your hand, and we'll also bring it up during the talk or in the end, okay? If you want to feel more comfortable putting in the chat, just put it in and we'll go along. Okay, Reid? So welcome to the meetup and the floor is yours.
Excellent, thank you. And we're going essentially into the top of the next hour, correct? Just to make sure I give enough time for questions at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So then, yeah, here it's 9:05 at the moment. So I'll probably do about 45 to 50 minutes of presentation, leaving around 5 to 10 minutes, depending for questions at the very end. I like to keep these things conversational. I've presented about 130 times now across different things around the world. So I really enjoy conversations. So as much as needed, I have the chat up on the side of my ultra wide monitor. So feel free to drop questions into the chat. I'll be monitoring that and leaving pauses for those, and then more of a general Q&A at the very end. But let me go ahead and sharing. There we go.
Sounds like a plan. Yeah, great.
Bring this up and I'm gonna get my chat. There we go. It always it minimizes whenever you share on Teams. Like, no, I don't want the Teams window minimized. I want the chat app up. All right, perfect. So we'll be talking about it's 2 titles that I have for this: avoiding common pitfalls in Power BI. It's also curating the report experience, the chef's kiss to reporting. The goal of this is to talk through a lot of the stuff that can go from a good to a great report in Power BI, and talking about a lot of the principles in that as well. So that's the topic that I want to be getting into with you today. Now, a little background about myself. You already have heard that I've been an MVP for about 5 years. I do a lot of design around the YouTube videos that I do, so I'll have some links for you at the end if you're curious as well. But I really enjoy the art side of report design. So, you know, modeling is more of the analytical, the math, the data, but I enjoyed a lot of the artistic aspects. The personification of that is the wizard that I have at the top, the VizWiz, visualization wizard. So you'll see that it's plastered all over my YouTube videos and everything. But that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today, and I'll keep it short just as that. But basically, what are we going to be getting into? So given the length of the time, we'll get through most of these, not necessarily all of them, but we're going to start from the report layer. And I want to walk through and talk about some of the things that we can design from that perspective. I'll even show you some other principles that I've done in some recent YouTube videos on some report upgrades and designs that you can do to enhance the experience with that as well. And even some ways to actually document some of the report items that you have from a recent video that I did just last month. The nice thing about a lot of my talks is when I do weekly videos on YouTube, I can easily evolve my presentations quite organically throughout the year as I continue to come up with small little ideas here and there that perfectly inject into the various video presentation topics that I have. So it's kind of like an always evolving talk every time I give any of my presentations. But what I want to start with is crafting the user experience. What does it mean to curate some of the things towards the audience we're delivering it to? Now, I've built hundreds of reports at this point for clients over the years, and you will never get a report perfectly right the first time it's delivered. Like, you might know a decent amount of best practices, and you'll get it closer the better you get, because you can learn how to predict based off of the industry that they're in or the audience that you've been talking to, what they might want. But without proper feedback or discussions, you're never going to quite get all the way there. And there's a degree of conversation that needs to happen to properly configure the types of things that we see in front of us here. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's good to have conversations, either directly through the clients or the audience. I often use Microsoft Forms. I use those a lot with clients to collect input on what works, what didn't. Do they have any feedback on that? I often build reports with a little URL link icon in the corner where they can submit feedback if they have a suggestion or if something was confusing. But everything from like the what is the default page, what slicers or filters are applied. If you find through in kind of feedback that the first thing that every single person does is they filter to current month, there is a good chance that maybe that should be a default filter onto the page. I wish Microsoft had telemetry on that. It would be lovely to actually be able to see logs of everything clicked in Power BI. That's not something that actually exists, but I have been very insistent on asking that for years. Like for places where that's legal to collect and permissions have been granted, it would be really nice to actually collect any kind of telemetry or feedback data from interactions on a report page so you can better understand behavior. But those are the things that we hope to figure out.
This is things that are done, for instance, on when you create a web page and you want to analyze a funnel or something like that. It's really done on other industries, right? So it's something could be great, yeah.
Yeah, and there are some tricks to doing that. The way you can technically find filters and others is you'd have to look at the query plans, and you can see against the model what the most requested queries are. But that's a lot of reverse engineering to get there. There's no easy way just to see a list on every user. What was the first click they did? Something like that. So the only way to really get that is you have to have a conversation or get feedback. But it goes towards, think of it like a journey. Every time somebody opens a report, they are trying to arrive at a destination, and the destination is an answer. They want to be able to have an answer to a question to make a decision with their data. And that can either be a very long journey or it can be a very short journey. So ideally, if you can have them move past the starting line and you can get them 30% of the way there through a series of the default pages, slicers, sort order as well, the drill location. So if you have a date hierarchy on a report and they only have 2 years of data right now, you probably don't need it at the year level. That might be useful in a couple of years from now, but maybe it's set at the quarter year, or maybe the axis is set at the month and year. Whatever is the most useful to look at to start with, to save them clicks and time. So that's kind of the initial thing that you want to think about setting up. And there's no right or wrong. It's subjective per person, per team that you're delivering this to. But they're very important things to think about when you're building this out, because there's so many default settings that you have. Another really big one actually around slicers and filters. There we go. If I can, I did a whole video on some of the hidden configurations that you can set that kind of can be either bugs or features. So with a slicer, if I can actually just go to my Power BI page, I'll show you a couple examples just to be a little ad hoc with this. So on let's just do, I'll grab like this, and maybe that, just stick that into a slicer. Here we go. So if you had a slicer that is configured at all in a dropdown, where's this here? There you go. So this slicer could look ready to go. Like there's no filters. So you might think, oh yeah, this is totally ready. But if you have these two expanded like this, when you publish it, these will stay expanded, which could be good or bad. Like if you want one of the lower levels expanded specifically to call out an important section of your company, that's a good thing. But otherwise, it looks a bit disorganized and you haven't cleaned up the house, so to speak, when publishing. So small things can actually be part of the default configuration that gets included. So any expansions that you have automatically are there. So you want to make sure that the levels are appropriately expanded or collapsed when you save. And another really big one that I've only found out due to a client feedback on this is if you have the search turned on, and if you have anything typed in here, that gets saved when you publish. When you open this, this text will still be there. So again, if the point of this is if you're trying to call out and filter down to a certain section for the users, it can be useful. I've personally never saved anything with text in there, but it is an option that you have. But you have to be careful of a lot of these things because it's really easy to miss small details. Now we are starting to get closer, that I'll talk about later, to tools helping us to automatically identify problems like this. We're now starting to get like report layer scanners that can tell us when there's problems. But normally I'm giving you these ideas because it's important when you're thinking, again, going back to our slides, when you're configuring all of this, give a lot of thought and have conversations on what will or won't make sense for the user when you are creating any of these default experiences. And also just knowing that there's a lot of small little hidden defaults that can be either added or sometimes missed if you're not careful. So it's easy just to make a report page. It takes a lot of time and effort to make a quality report page that's truly dialed in to the audience that you're delivering that to. So starting the conversation on some of those ideas, at least there. Now, moving a little bit further into the things that we can configure as well, another big one is also the options that we have for the visual headers. So to use a movie title, Microsoft kind of gives you everything everywhere all at once. It gives you all the buttons, all the pop-ups, all the icons on every visual, a lot of which are redundant or unnecessary. I like to describe humans as very curious creatures. If you put a button in front of somebody, they might not, at a minimum, they'll be distracted by it. If not, probably touch it and press it, and that might break something. So we don't want to give them any icons, any pop-ups, any distractions on the page. The K.I.S.S methodology, which stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid, it can be used for websites, it can be used for PowerPoints. The simpler, the better for everything. So I'm very much on the boat of as much white space as possible. I still use colors, I use gradients, but I try to keep as few items, lines, icons, pop-ups as physically possible on a page that still lets a question be answered. If you have a report page that everybody can answer or make a decision from, and you add anything after that, to me, that's just considered excess. It's you're adding cognitive load, you're adding distractions, you're adding unnecessary level of detail or anything else to the page that just isn't necessary anymore because they already can make decisions with the report. Now, some rare exceptions sometimes with, maybe like a color gradient, like background to the title or something else, small little details. But most of the time, what you add to a report page needs to add some type of ascribed value. And that's kind of why I'm wanting to focus on this with the header icons and show you both from the filter pane perspective and the header icons, how these are really powerful features to have, but can also become easily overly complicated and confusing to people. So the filter pane in general, it is one of my favorite features. It makes it very easy to add a lot of filters without cluttering the report page, but it also can, I think, become complicated or confusing for individuals. We have 3 levels or filter scopes. Filters at the report level filter the whole report. We have individual page level filters that just filters everything on the page. And then we have filters applied per visual. Now, I generally bucket these into developer filters and report viewer filters. Developer filters are the ones that are usually set by the developer. So top 10 for a visual that's top 10 product category. You have 100 of them, you only really care about the best selling ones. Anything that's a date filter, anything else that just cleans up a visual, the end user doesn't need to adjust those or edit those, but they are needed because of the model design and based off of the requirements for that report page. But it's not something that the users will interact with. So generally, I try to make sure that these are kind of removed and hidden because, again, distractions. There's no need to show them all of the filters applied to a visual if it's been properly titled, anything else. So we'll kind of look at that a little bit here. But let's see like how this can apply. So if I have a filter on a visual, we also have options at any level to technically lock or hide them. Now, usually when I do one, I do the other. It's fairly rare when I'm going to lock but not hide a filter. Most of the time I do them side by side. We'll see some examples during the demonstration, but they're generally kind of two halves of a coin. You usually do both of them or neither of them. But let's just see an example of them applied versus not. So right now, I have a filter applied to this visual where it is top 10 by page views based on site name, just some Google Analytics data. Now, with it not hidden, what you're going to get is that also is going to start showing up in the filters and slicers affecting this visual. Now, this is one of my favorite features that they added to Power BI 3-4 years ago, because it helps to provide transparent context on if they click a slicer, if the user interacts with a filter at the page of the report level, their filters start showing up in this list. Now, I have seen this become useless in so many reports because the developer has added a rolling 30 at the page level. There's a hidden filter on the page that's needed that was applied and hidden. There is a visual level filter applied. So when they go to hover over this, they get 5, 6, or 7 developer filters showing up into there. Something does not equal 0. This does not equal blank. All this junk that the user has no idea about. They don't understand the model design. So when they look at this, they don't really know what they've personally affected on that visual, meaning their slicers, their filters versus these fixed developer filters. So my recommendation normally is to make sure that if you are applying any developer filters, something that the user will never adjust. It's a filter that will always be applied and it's locked and it's needed, but it is not going to be added, removed, or modified by the user itself. If you lock and hide them, then this list is remains clean and unobstructed by anything. So now nothing's filtering it. You have a title that represents that there's a filter pre-applied, but this list should only be for filters that they personally can modify in some way. If they have a slicer for year, they select 2014, that should show up here. If they change the product category as X, same thing. But then it's a clean list of their personal filters that they have modified in some way or added, and nothing that the developer is kind of like crossing the streams within here. So again, another really good feature, but I feel the value is often diminished or killed off, and people just never look at this because there's like 10 filters in there, and it's confusing. I don't know what I'm looking at, so they just ignore it entirely. So many good features in Power BI. A lot of them require some thought and consideration to make sure that it's manageable and understandable for the end users, and it doesn't just become a useless feature. So that's why I highly encourage you to lock and hide filters that will not be modified, and you either name the page appropriately. So if you have a page level filter for rolling 30, lock and hide that, title the page rolling 30 or something that, or just have a box somewhere on the page that indicates there's a filter applied at the page level. Same thing with visual titles. It's fairly rare that I'll ever have that. Now, sorry, unhidden. The one exception is there have been times where I have a single visual on the page that is filtered to a rolling 30 days. It's like sales last 30 for one single visual. I will lock it. And that's the one time that I'll actually keep it unhidden, because then if you come up here, you'll see the date range in the filter selection from the visual level. They can't see it in the filter pane itself, or change the filter, but they can at least see the filter context because it's relevant to show what the filter itself is, what the visual itself is doing. But it's good context, I think, to give you, because again, I want to encourage the use of all of these really great report level or report features, but that also just often get kind of shoved to the side because people don't really know how to use them, or they get too complicated because the developer didn't take the time to go through this stuff. Now, another one that I love as well, as I mentioned, is the header icons. So these are items that really, I think, go a long way to adding value when they make sense for a visual. But as you can see from the list over here, we have a lot of header icons that are available. We can also individually turn them on or off. So at the very top level, we can turn on or off the header icons entirely and just simply have that turned on or off per visual. Now, one of the things that we can do for certain types, like shapes, text boxes. I'd argue even slicers. Slicers are meant to filter other things. Most of the time, you don't need to focus mode a slicer. You don't need to take a screenshot of it. All those extra visual features don't really apply to certain objects because they're there to interact with and cause effects to happen on other things. So turning them off at the top level for certain objects makes sense. Things such as like the pin icon. I'd be curious to know how many of you have made a dashboard in any recent years. I honestly, the last time I've pinned anything to a dashboard is for any client has probably been 2 to 3 years at this point. All of my dashboards are reports. It's kind of to me, a dead product. Some people still use them. There's exceptions, of course, but do we need a pin icon on every single visual to pin to a dashboard that they're never going to use? That's an extra icon, that's a distractor. So it's good to think about with all of these, what makes sense for which visuals. Now, later on, when we do the demo, Power BI tips, they have a theme generator that actually lets you configure all of this. So it's not just colors and fonts, but you can actually build a custom theme file that lets you configure defaults on what visuals have the header icons turned on or off entirely, per visual, which of these are turned on or off. So you have full control to actually configure a theme file to default all of these settings that you'd like to ensure that when you make a new report with the custom theme, it's going to aim fairly closely to whatever best practices you might have, which is really useful versus having to go and click and turn everything off over and over again. It saves you a lot of time. But it's just to that idea of distraction. We want the fewest amount of distractions as possible on a report page. And there will also be some practices that I'll talk about in terms of how to observe these. Again, I'll mention a couple of tools that are working towards automating this process. But today, one of the only really good place to review a lot of these changes is in reader mode. Now, if that's a term that you're not familiar with, reader mode is when you were looking at a report in a workspace or an app in Power BI and you can't edit anything. Like you can click a slicer, you can't move a visual, you can't delete or add a new report page. That's called reader mode. Edit mode is if you click the little pencil edit icon in the service in a workspace, if you have permissions or you're in Power BI Desktop. Now, unfortunately, Power BI Desktop does not have a reader mode experience today. It is planned at some point to come to desktop where you can preview like published mode and see what it looks like for the end user. But yeah, and we'll get into the theme generator. But if you want to look at it now, just Power BI tips theme generator, Google, it's the top result. But today we cannot in Power BI Desktop observe some of these changes. So if I hid this icon, like the expand to next level, I will still see that in desktop mode because it's in edit mode. The actual effects of certain changes, so hiding header icons, hiding the filter pane visuals or filter pane filters, all of those effects can't actually be seen. So you can make the changes, but it's really easy to miss some of those in desktop because you can't see the final product. So we'll actually get a chance to see in the service my personal workaround for this, the fastest way to kind of iterate through small changes if you missed something. It's not perfect, but I do find it faster than having to go back to desktop, save, republish, view it in the service, and that can be very slow if you have a 500 megabyte file for a Power BI Desktop file. So we'll see a couple of observations around that. So the last thing that I'll talk about before I get into the demo is also the help tooltip. It's a very buried feature in my opinion. So the only way to get this to turn on is you have to go to the actual icons section under header icons and you toggle this on. And after you do that, you get this new menu that opens up. I've told Microsoft many times they need to take this radio toggle here. They need to put that just right on this other menu. Just keep the menu always there. Put the toggle at the top level menu. The fact that this entire menu disappears unless you first open up this other menu, turn this icon on, a lot of people miss that. And most presentations that I give this with, there's usually one person who, oh, I didn't even know that existed. What that will give you is a little icon in the headers with a question mark. And if you hover over it, you get a tooltip text of up to 250 characters that just explains something. So if you're using a ribbon chart, maybe it's an explanation of what a ribbon chart does. Maybe you're describing a little bit about the data or explaining if there's a budget line, what the budget line is calculated based off of. You can put in whatever you want to, and it just helps to provide context for the page or the visual that explains something. Years ago, I used to do this with bookmarks. You'd put an icon on the page, you'd click it, it popped up a text box, and that would explain some stuff. obviously very complicated to do that with 20 visuals on a page. This makes it very easy just to add little helper explainer text all around. And I use these quite often with client reports. Even if it's just 1 or 2 sentences of a brief description of something, it can often be very useful to provide some relevant context to the visual or the report page, and you get less emails on from people or less Teams messages on asking a question for something. Now, the one thing that is nice too is you can actually attach it to a report tooltip page. So that does sometimes become a little expensive, so to speak, because if you needed a custom report tooltip page per visual, you have 10 visuals per page, you have 10 pages, you can end up with 50 hidden report tooltip pages. But if you want to pretty it up a little bit, so if you wanted to add some images, maybe a chart, some other fancier stuff, you can definitely do that. But I use those sparingly unless really needed, because then the overhead is you just have a ton of hidden pages in your report experience. Okay, so with that said, let me go ahead and hop into the demo here. All right. So I have this published online. Again, the place that I like to finish my changes is in the Power BI service. Now, most of my stuff will be done in something like the Power BI desktop environment that you saw here. But let's assume that I think I got everything right. Like I did all my icon hiding, I used the theme generator, whatnot, but I still want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. And I'll show you why I need to do this in the service. So let's just give an example of hiding the header icons, just in theory. So if I came up to the slicer and I click hide, they're still there. So when I publish this, these icons will be gone. But again, I cannot actually see that change until I am in the service. There's no view reader mode button here today. It is coming with a bunch of bigger changes because eventually the new like Power Query 2.0 that's in the web is coming to desktop. There's a big group of changes in the I think in the next 6 to 12 months that's coming to desktop with a migration of a lot of features, but we will eventually get a reader mode preview here, but we just don't have that today. So I'm at least showing you the problem and why I'm in the browser to make my final changes, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. So this is considered reader mode. You see that there's an edit icon here to go back to edit mode, but this is what reader mode would look like right now. It's the workspace or the app experience for viewers. Now, I will talk about some of the tools that are going to start helping to automate this process, but it quite literally is taking a fine-tooth comb and going through the report page today if you're doing a free version of this. So I will honestly go through and I hover with my mouse to see what pop-ups I get. So right now, this slicer, no pop-ups. I like that. Now, these are the things that I don't think we need. Do I need to set an alert for my slicer? No. Do I need to see what's filtering it? Again, my argument is slicers filter other stuff. I don't really need to see that this analytics selection or my metric selection. I don't need to know that unique page views is being applied to this. It's something that does not make sense. Again, it's a distraction. So normally I hide all of the icons for a slicer. We don't want people to click something like this. And I've had clients before focus mode something and then they think they broke the report page because they're not really sure what just happened. You get a bunch of white space and maybe they don't notice the back button. It's a very useless function to do for those things. So we want to prevent headaches, issues, or complications for individuals. So I can come, because I missed this, I'm going to go to edit, select the slicer, come over to header icon under general. And by the way, you might notice that like this format pane is a little different. The desktop is using that new hybrid on object formatting these days. The service is still using the older format pane, so that's why there's a small difference between the design.
Thank
But if I
God,
hide
right?
it, yeah. Well, since December, we did get at least a little bit of the old format pane back like this, which is why I technically am using it. I never use on object formatting. I hate it. I hate it so much. There's too many options to have as pop-ups, in my opinion, but that's a whole separate rant that I can have on that thing. But yeah, we have at least the old one in here. We turned it off, and if we come back to reading view and save changes, we have the magic wand, we can see the pop-up's not there anymore. So it slowly starts to remove those little distractions, those pop-ups. And we also want to ensure that a couple of other things as well too. So if we are ever using shapes as background objects, I'm personally of the boat that I think it's okay to add 1 or 2 shapes onto the page to frame something. Mike Carlo on Power BI Tips calls them scrims, but anything you can use to group things together. So in this case, this chart, just as a small digression, is driven by these two objects. These slices only relate to this chart. By grouping it with a color, it associates them together to make it clear that, hey, these are related, these are not related. If you do that, you want to make sure that you don't have any pop-ups like this. Now, Microsoft did make an update on this a few years ago. Very old legacy reports, Shapes had these turned on by default. Thankfully, the Shapes 2.0 that came out, I think 3-4 years ago, the shapes go to the very edge of the frame now and a few other features. They have it turned on by default, but obviously legacy reports might still have those. But if you are using shapes in any way, just again, rarely will you ever need these icons turned on. So it's also important to have those turned off because then it helps to fuse it into the background. It makes it seem less like a shape on the page. It's more just part of the background color that just happens to be on the page with you. So you want that seamless integration to make it seem like a web page, not a series of tacked on each other PowerPoint objects. You want a clean interface with that stuff. So those are some of the things that I'm trying to encourage from a top level, just turning off the header icons entirely. I will mention one story of just a client that their UI team was so strict on the design process for this. So technically, I still have a pop-up right here. This is built into the browser. It's an accessibility thing. So you hover over the title, you get a little mini title that pops up with your mouse, right? They didn't want this. So they had a report page with probably 30 cards, charts, slicers. They added a baby text box over every single title of every visual. They added about 28 additional text boxes to cover the titles just so this little pop-up wouldn't show up.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like I tried really hard to like, please don't do that. Again, just little pro tips and digressions. I'm just gonna throw a whole bunch of text boxes onto this page. So let's just add like maybe about 30 of these. Just tack them all on, and let's go to the performance analyzer. And I think, how many do I have now? Let's add a few more. I wanted to get to the bottom. Okay, there we go. Start recording. Just the text boxes by themselves add some time. Now, just as one mentioned, you're not supposed to sum the performance analyzer together. The longest time that you see here is the time it took for the whole page to render. So I think it's about maybe 156 milliseconds was the slowest visual. That's the last visual to load. So I think I know a lot of people sum these together. They think that it's a cumulative total. No, it's the longest delay is the final visual to load on the page, but it's still not nothing. And if you have these plus shapes and visuals and all this other stuff, it can start to slow down the report page. So like that, this is what I try to show that client is do not add 30 text boxes. You're going to slow down the report a lot. They didn't listen in that case and they still added them, but there's definitely a lot of times where I see very pretty, very slow report pages because it was built by a web designer, not a Power BI designer. The more visuals you have on a page and the more objects you have, the slower it gets. If you have one single box for like a shape like that, and you add 100 milliseconds, nobody's ever going to know the difference for that. But just don't add 20 or 30 of those when you come out of that. So there's a fine line between, I would say, good design on minimizing this stuff, minimizing pop-ups. But if you're also adding unnecessary complexity or a performance cost in exchange for that good design, you have to figure out where that line is going to be crossed. And there's not a right or wrong answer to that, but it's something to also consider as you're going through this stuff. So now that I've talked at least about the top level with the headers entirely, let's kind of go in a little bit further onto the individual ones. So another example that I want to go through is like also hiding some of the individual header icons themselves. So under general, under header icons, and again, the thing that's very hidden is that help tooltip. You will never know that it exists unless you come to header icons all the way down. So it is a great feature, very hidden. I would love them just to add that icon right here at the top level and just keep the menu always visible. But very useful feature when you need to. And in this case, I'm explaining this ribbon chart displays, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an explanation of what it's doing, but it goes a long way to helping people. But when you think about it, like what do we want to hide or keep hidden in here? And sorry, keep visible. So like the pin icon, that's something that I'd honestly probably have for most visuals. If I have a hierarchy, depending on the design of the hierarchy in a visual, you may want to like limit the types of hierarchy controls you have. Do you want them to be able to expand? In this case, sometimes what I have is I have a hierarchy that has, here we go, year, quarter year, and month and year. So it's a hierarchy where each column has the full date context. So if I just show the quarter year column, that has the full date context to give me appropriate periods. I don't need to combine my year and my date. So if I was to expand this, I'm concatenating the data unnecessarily. I have year, quarter year, so now I'm adding too much data to the axis because it doesn't need to do that based off of the column design. So in this case, I don't want people to click this button because it starts to make the visual look broken. People might think that there's a bug or something. This is a situation where we have an opportunity to hide that type of navigation control. So that's why I would hide the expand. So it's off, but it's still there. But in reader mode, the user does not get an option for this one because the visual does not require it for the types of columns that I'm using. Go back to reading view. And here I have drill down, go up, and I have go to next level, but I cannot expand it. I only can use what I'm enforcing now based off of the design. So I'm helping to ensure good practice of the navigation experience for the fact that I'm hiding icons that they shouldn't be using. Now, before I go into the filters, I will talk now about the themes generator that Power BI Tips has. So it's theme, this one, yep. So kudos again to Mike. He has built a really great platform off of this. And the cool thing is there's actually a GitHub repository for every editable or configurable item that can be configured via a themes file. This doesn't get manually updated. He just has a tool that automatically just scans the GitHub repo, like I think a couple times a week. And if they add a new attribute that can be edited, this thing automatically gets it in its menu. So the menu is basically auto-built. The names and everything else comes just from the Microsoft repository for this. It's entirely free to build from scratch. Everything is available for free. They do have a paid version for like $3 or $5 a month. The one thing that gets you is cloud save. So if you spend an hour configuring this, you can download it. It's free. It's yours to use. But if you ever need to make an edit on that, you would have to come. You'd either have to edit the JSON yourself, or you'd have to start from scratch. If you pay a few bucks a month, it saves it to your basically login that you have, and then you can edit that whenever you need to. I think it's worth a few bucks a month. Like I have about 7 theme files that I have, and I can just come and make changes. But that's the one big difference. And they also have a. I'm just going to sign in here. I'm going to sign up with Microsoft. Let me just log in, and I'm going to show you all the features to edit with this. But I'll show you the one other cool features. You get a live preview of an embedded visual as you make the theme changes, so you can see the color changes, the title changes, and all that. But the properties that I want to talk about first, I'm going to come here, and we have a set of global properties. And again, mentioning these titles are not what Mike or his team has called them. Everything that's in here is how Microsoft calls it. So if you see something that has a bit of a weird wording, Microsoft probably chose a bad word to title a certain section of their repository. So all of this is just auto-harvested from whatever Microsoft has documented. But let's assume that we want to do the header icon. That should be down under, I think it's headers, header icons. And we have a search box for this specifically. So icon, visual header, there it is, yep. So thankfully we have a search box to find this. So visual header, and here I can choose at the global level. So this is not per visual, because I can actually make a ton of formatting changes per visual as a default, but at the top level, the pin icon, I don't want to use that. So that now means that my theme, every single object in visual that I ever add, this is going to be turned off by default. If I want to turn off the focus mode or anything else, I have global controls to create a theme file with all of these things configured and edited as necessary at that top level. So very useful to do that. And you can basically build your perfect theme file off of this. The slicer, as an example over here. Visual header, I believe there is an option for, I think it's, let's do this. Was that visual header? Here it is, show. So again, wording sometimes a little interesting, but the word show represents, do I have the entire visual header turned on or off? So if I turn that off, there we go. That's now going to be hidden at the slicer level. But the cool thing, again, that they have as part of that like paid option, they run a version of Power BI embedded. So as I start to change my settings in here, I get a live preview of my changes. So I can make sure it doesn't look bad. So if I was to change the background to black, whatever changes I make instantly show up in a version of Power BI before I actually download the file. So that's one of the kind of nice little feature that comes with that, again, for the paid version at least. But it's nice to see live changes before you download something to make sure that you're not ending up with a really ugly design as you're making some certain practices for that. But this thing, there is a video on my live stream from Mike Carlo for Power BI tips that he walks through a whole hour of a lot of stuff on this. So I'd check out the YouTube link that I'll have here in a little bit. But it is my favorite theme generator. There's a few others, but this is 100% mapped to every single item you could possibly change. And it saves you a ton of time when all of your best practices for your design choices have already been baked into the theme file. So I really, really like this. And there's only a few things that I do per visual. It's usually slicers and a couple of other stuff. But the number one thing that I would highly encourage you to do from a global level, if there's any certain features across like all bar charts, all borders as an example, whether or not you want any of these top level settings, it goes so far into not having to make those individual changes and missing stuff. As we're getting up, one of the last things that I want to talk about, and again, hopefully open this up to some questions as well, I want to talk about the filters as part of this report, Curating experience. So coming back to actually this one here. So I've talked about the visual headers, but also minimizing distractions from the filter experience here. Now, the goal of these filters in the headers is we want to call out things that the user can interact with. So data as of, I have a filter pane filter that lets them go from current month or prior month. So it's an anchor date. Do I want to show open period or do I want to show only closed periods? It just simply filters the end of the date range for them, but they can change that. So that is something I would want to see in this list. The metric, that just changes the data that's in the visual. So again, we would want to see that. But the source, top 5 by metric selection, I don't really want them to see that. That's already in the title, and it's also wrong, which is another example of it's important if you ever have filters, you change them to ensure that you update the title because they don't automatically sync. But in this last one, which is more of a developer filter, metric is not average session time. A quick anecdote on what that is, the metric selection has a whole bunch of different calculations in it. The average session time doesn't make sense for these visuals. So I filtered that out of the page so this slicer and everything else just wouldn't show it. So again, it's needed from the developer. The user should never know about that because it's irrelevant for their knowledge. So we want to help curate that list a little bit. So I'm going to come up to edit. Let's at least make sure that this source by top 5 is hidden. That's one thing we've done. Now that will reduce out of this list. And then we also have that metric. It's a filter on the page. We don't want that showing. We're finally down to a shortened list of only filters. And the important part is can the user add, remove, or modify these filters? Anything in this list should be able to be configurable in some method via the filter pane or the slicer from the end user. Otherwise, I'd say like if they already locked filter in any way, remove them from this list, add a title or a subtitle to the visual with that, or add a box or a help tooltip, something else to provide that. That list really should be driving what their interactions have been rather than the developer interactions. Now, another thing to talk about in here on the idea of the filter pane, one, notice these warning icons. So it's very easy as you continue to evolve and make tons of changes to your report over the years. If you delete columns from the model, they don't always just disappear from the filter pane. sometimes they will stay there, but then you get a warning icon because it's been removed from the model, but it sometimes, but not always, disappears from this list. Now, nothing's technically broken, but it can look concerning when you have an error icon to somebody in there. So it's good to sometimes review the filter pane at the visual level and at the page or report level, just to make sure you don't have any kind of cobwebs left that are around there from old columns that have at some point been deleted from the model that maybe used to get used. So, but also the last thing in here is, again, the idea of developer versus user filters. So users should use filters on this page. Report viewers, users, should also use filters on all pages. I hate this experience. So if you click on a visual, all of my filters for the user are now down here. We get all of these filters for the visual level that clutter up the space and shove everything down. And somebody might accidentally apply a filter at this level. And then, well, why did that one visual have a filter applied to it and the others didn't? Like, it's extra effort for them to do that, or they have to come and scroll down to get to the filters that they want. So there's no magic wand that automatically hides all of these. It's a manual process today, but it's something that I encourage. If you use the filter pane, I don't like these to be hidden. So I go through and I ensure, and yes, this is a one column at a time thing, sadly. There is no hide all button that we have for the filter level, visual level filters. I really wish we did. Hopefully coming someday. But if it's hidden entirely for the visual, then if you click the visual, you don't get that extra pop-up. So it is one of those, again, ideas that the filter pane is very useful, but I hate that every time you click a visual, it causes those pop-ups to show up, which exposes the developer settings to a degree. Like, users don't ever need to interact with filters at a single visual level. Some people might argue differently, but you apply a filter at the page, or you have a slicer that is specifically attached to a visual, but they shouldn't have to sort through that mess. It should already be laid out for them, easy to use and easy to navigate. Yes, it's a little bit of a slow process, and I'd recommend making those changes when you are done with the page, because it's easy to miss one. If this visual, if I all of a sudden come and add, let's just say, like, one new item to my tooltip well, I made one change to my visual. I added one field extra. Here's the problem if I had hidden and then made some changes. Now, if I click this visual, I have that single field now visible at the visual level. So the very last thing that you should do on a whole, like, report cleanup when you're done, that should be one of the final things that you do, is to hide the visual level filters. But just be very aware that as soon as you make any change to your filters or the field configuration for that visual, those won't be hidden by default. And no, there unfortunately is no setting in the theme generator to say hide by default. That's not a configuration that's available for Power BI files. Again, there are some tools that I think will be starting to automate this soon. This will be my final mention on kind of the ideas of this. Power Ops, Power BI. So this Power Ops tool that is getting a couple of new updates recently. So their desktop app is going to have a best practices analyzer, and it's free for desktop. But what it will have is it both maps out and analyzes the data model, but also the report layer. Like, you can see how it actually tells you what pages, number of visual types. There's also going to be a BPA analyzer that they're working on at the moment. I'm also helping beta test it a little bit, but it's going to have things where, like, best practices. Do you have any visual level filters visible for a visual? So you'll actually get an audit report where you can actually see what's wrong, for like high, medium, and low severity rules. So there's a little bit of an automation process, and I'm hoping tools like this or others someday, kind of like with Tabular Editor, maybe there will be a button where apply fix. If it can just go into the JSON code and just make the changes for you and do that, with one click, rather than having to click hundreds of fields to hide individually. So I think we're getting there. This tool or others, I think, will someday soon start to have that. But we are at least going from a manual scanning your mouse process to automated reviews. And I do think in the near future, with the new report layer definition language coming out from Microsoft, kind of like Tyndall, but it's going to be a clean, readable scripting language for the report layer as well. I think we're very near getting a lot of external tools and automations to have a lot of that auto magical cleanup applied to the report layer with less manual process as well. But these are all good practices for you to think about, I think, because the report does require a lot of love. A lot of people say like report building is easy. To make a basic report, yes, super simple to throw a chart on the page and publish it. But to make a good report does still take a lot of time and consideration and thought just to make sure it's not too complicated and it looks professional versus thrown together kind of at the last minute. So these are the things that I like to talk about to help get you to understand what you should or maybe shouldn't be delivering as part of extra features for the client with some of these things. Oh yeah, Tyndall's amazing. Matisse is a good friend of mine. I'll actually be seeing him next week in London when I'm stopping through on the way to Croatia for Data Saturday. But I think at this point we're at 9:55. So what I'd love to do now is, if there's any questions, feel free to either come off mute, drop it into the chat window as well. But happy to open it up for discussion at this point now. And let me throw up some links.
Yeah, okay. Yes, very, very interesting right now. I think many of us are identifying already some of the pain points we live in our daily routine. So thank you for showing up that.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we have questions from the audience. A lot of applauses, so people are really enjoying.
I'm just looking at some of them now. You can change the background of the filter. Oh yeah. I will also say just on the idea of the filter pane, they are Miguel Myers, who is the PBI Core Visuals kind of new initiative that he became the product manager for the canvas, the report canvas last year. And he actually has a design and background. So the new button, the new card visual, the new slicer visual, all of those have been from his team. The goal eventually is to we're going to have a filter pane that's going to be very customizable. So we'll actually be able to add in the filter pane, any slicer type that we have as a slicer will be available in the filter pane. So we can have like a slider slicer, like a date range slicer in there. We can choose the ordering of it. It's almost like a visual itself, like a visual container where we can just add a bunch of slicer options into there. So it will be much more customizable than it is today. And we can choose, do we want it on the left or the right of the screen? So that's on the public roadmap for that. But there is a big push to have a lot more features for the filter pane come out and have it work a lot better than it is today. So a lot of those headaches of the limitations that we have now with it will be alleviated in the next year or so when we eventually get the new filter pane.
Yeah, that would be interesting for sure. We have one hands up. So Jose, do you want to open the mic to post a question? Yes. Or maybe you can write it. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I think they should be able to come off you, yeah?
Yeah.
Or do they need to become an attendee?
Was by mistake, okay. No, it was not a question. I don't, let me check in the chat if in the meantime we have any other. So
and I'll throw one other link up too, is what I also do is I do a blog or I do a raffle for people who have attended. So there's a little short form to fill out. It signs you up for the free blog that I have. Welcome to cancel at any time. But I put your name into a hat and I draw one name from that hat and they win a consulting call with me for half an hour. So you can pick my brain on DAX, visuals, Power BI. If you have any curiosities about Fabric or my Power BI or just want some help on like a problem you're stuck on with Power BI at work, basically just having half an hour to pick my brain on something. So feel free to scan that, fill out the blog, and we can go from there.
Okay, we have here some questions, so a little bit off topic, but what is your opinion regarding using custom canvas background using external tools such as Figma or PowerPoint instead of creating all the boxes and titles natively in Power BI desktop? It is great for reducing cluster and improve performance. Thank you. So it is from João. Any comment regarding this?
Yeah, so I know a few other people like Mara from Data Pair and a few others use Figma and those, but I find like it adds a lot of extra time for me. Like the canvas is so easy in Power BI to just throw a visual onto the page, drop that, and a lot of the insights to me comes out once I see the data in the visual. Like the right shape of the visual, I might think that it's going to be this, but when I realize, oh, well, 90% of the data is in this one category, okay, bar chart's kind of not really good just because the rest of it's all white space. So I do my mockups just directly in desktop and I throw my shapes onto the page just because it's so fast. I've tried it a couple times in PowerPoint and a few other places, but honestly, I kind of like wireframe as I go through because again, the biggest insights for me come off seeing the physical data in the visual that helps me decide the shape and how's the labeling? Okay, it's a little too tight. What about if I flipped it over maybe to this and okay, that works a bit better vertically. Like it really is just putting the Lego blocks together live and figuring that stuff out. Again, it kind of goes to where your design comes from. I know like people like Mike Carlo and her Mara do a lot of like the Figma and other stuff, but it's never added that much extra value for me to do that. The only thing that I'd say as a takeaway from it is very rarely do I ever add that many extra items. So like right now, the only extra items that I have on the page is I have 2 additional shapes, the one background behind this, well, I guess the image there, and then so it's the 3 objects that maybe adds like 160 milliseconds to the page load time. That's very minimal. I'm obviously not going to use 30 text boxes for titles or anything like that. And technically, it will be slightly faster if I had a single background that had everything on it. But the problem is the second that I need to like move anything around, I have to go back to PowerPoint or Photoshop or Figma. I have to move the shape objects. I have to save the image file. I have to come back to desktop. I have to go to the background. I have to re-import it. And I love Snap. So the snap to grid, that is every 8 pixels, I space everything by snaps. So I'm just let's just quickly throw a background out of here. The way that I get perfect alignment on like, let's do a random slicer. It's really easy for me to get pixel perfect alignment of all my shapes, 1 snap at a time. And like right there, they're pixel perfect alignment with each other, already pre-aligned. So everything that I do is based off of a snap. And I've found that it's hard to get perfect snap placement of my background object with that. It might be a pixel or 2 off, and it's enough that it looks slightly askew. And then that means that now I have to come to this, I have to do that, and I have to adjust just slightly, or I have to come to the where is it, size and properties, and like make pixel adjustments here. So it all leads to what's fastest for you. So I'd say whatever approach you have that is fastest for you to develop, that's the one that you should go with. When it comes to actual performance of fusing your background objects with shapes and other stuff, if you're using like only a couple, like 3 or 4 objects, maybe 3 or 4 extra text boxes total for the page and or background objects, you'll never notice a performance difference on that. It's only when you're getting into 10, 15, 20 of those, then yes, start to blend that in. And if you're going for the really fancy stuff that like Mara does, where you have like the really pretty gradient backgrounds, you have the text box frames that has like some nice little color objects, things that really go into a professional web page, background objects for that with the built-in shadows and other stuff certainly goes a long way to add that. But if you're just doing a clean, simple report with basic features, and if this isn't going onto a lobby TV screen or something, just developing in Power BI I find is fine for 95% of the reports. I only go into the deep design stuff when it's usually for a client that's presenting to the CEO, or this is a company-wide report that is published publicly on a website where some degree of design is needed to add a wow factor. But it's a non-technical report, and it's something that's supposed to be extra pretty from that perspective. But that's few and far in between for most reports.
Okay, so the very key element is keep it simple as you could to have the better performance and the less time to development. So I think we have time just for one last question from the audience.
I will say though is PowerPoint is like all of my YouTube thumbnails are made by PowerPoint, by the way. Like I could use Photoshop, but like this is basically what a YouTube thumbnail for me normally is, and like that it's PowerPoint is one of my favorite photo editors. It is. I use Photoshop sometimes, but PowerPoint is really easy to layer, shadow, and
If
do a
it
couple other
works,
things for quick
right?
thumbnails. Yeah, exactly.
And it's getting
If
better.
it works, why are you doing anything
on
different?
that. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing
Okay.
that I would say is not that good is the remove background. It doesn't do clean lines if you actually remove the background. That's the one thing that I wish was a little better. I will actually go to Photoshop for background removal because it doesn't smooth the edges. So you can definitely tell when you
Yeah.
have those jagged lines if you do that.
Great, great. I think we don't have any other question from the audience. Pedro, do you want to have some comments, some final
Yeah,
comments
sure.
to the?
Sure. So thanks everyone for coming to the meetup, and special thanks to Reid for sharing this. I think you spread some pieces of gold with simple things, but really takeaways that people can actually use on the day-to-day and go back and rethink and look at their reports and see if it's really implemented or not. If we have 1 minute before closing, I'm interested to ask you one thing, which is one of the icons also that we can activate or not is, for instance, the ability to personalize visuals, but you also have the options to allow the field parameters or even the different bookmarks to change the visuals. Have you seen in your experience the use cases for allowing the personalization of visuals? Does it relate to the maturity of the audience to allow that, or do you see any cases between one or the other to allow that to be on?
It's a cool feature with the personalized visuals, and you can use them you can pair them together with perspectives, to get filtered paint. I just don't know that many people that ever need those. A properly built report already has the visuals in those configurations, and very few people, I think, know the right visual to use. If you give somebody an option to change it from a bar to a column to a waterfall to all this other stuff, most of the time they're going from probably the best visual to represent that data to a worse one. And anybody who actually wants to reanalyze their data usually just wants to put it into a pivot table for analysis. So I think it's a great feature, but I've seen very little need for an audience. Like I've told people about that. I've never once had a single client like, yeah, I'd really like to be able to configure that visual myself. Nobody's ever asked me to do that. And I've told plenty of people about it. Like, oh, that's cool. I probably don't need that.
Yeah.
So great idea, kind of like Q&A, but a properly built report doesn't really need to have natural language questions because the data has kind of already been curated to provide that information for them from a person who speaks the language better. Because visuals are their own language to a degree. Unlike the right data with the right visual, because the right data with the wrong visual can tell a bad story. And I do think that you give that much freedom to people, they'll end up looking at it in a way that just becomes confusing or wrong if they use those. So like a lot of features with Microsoft, love the idea, but I don't see a lot of practical use for it.
Yeah, it makes sense, Reid, and thanks for sharing your experience. So thanks a lot, Reid, for your presentation today, and I hope to see many of you using some of the tips that Reid shared about incorporating these on your reports, on your objects, directly on the theme, all of this to make your reports better. Thanks a lot, Reid, and hope to see you again in the near future or in a future conference, right?
Absolutely, yes. Great talking to you as well, and have a great night, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Time to catch up also with the Microsoft build. So if you guys aren't checking, it's already starting at the same time we started the meetup. So go check it out. There will be a lot of news also involving Power BI and Fabric. So it should be something exciting to look for. Thanks a lot, Reid. Thanks everyone in the community, and see you on the next time.
Reid.
Thank you.
Bye. See you.
Bye-bye.